would you leave Canada and move back to Zambia? If I had one kwacha for every time I've been asked that question, I'd have about 36 kwacha or so. After spending a little more than 10 years in Canada, away from my home country of Zambia, I seem to encounter many people questioning my decision to move back home. Like they possibly couldn't fathom why someone would willingly choose to stay and live in Zambia. Granted, with current issues like load shedding, this is a valid question. But I have a reason why, and I'd like to share that with you. I left Zambia for Canada as an international student, and I think it would be fair to assume that most of us, if given the chance, would be willing to take the next available flight out of the country in pursuit of education or employment opportunities. And so I got to Canada, and at first, everything seemed shinier and newer than what I was used to. I was eager to reinvent myself, to become more modern and refined, to fit into this new society. But I couldn't help but notice a couple of differences. The first thing that stood out to me was how quiet the buses and trains were. You think of our bus stations, Kulimatao, for example. The music the bus drivers would be playing, the general conversations people have as they go by, the banter from the conductors. I'm sure most of us have a story or two involving comments from a conductor that either left you feeling amused or that just hurt your feelings. This new silence was loud. The people were polite, but they weren't friendly and welcoming. Another thing is that people minded their business, which is not a bad thing. But back home, nosiness looks like someone asking you, Mwaka Bwanji, how did you wake? Or Mwasawenza Bwanji, how did you work? What I thought was nosiness, I now realize, is simply rooted in the sense of responsibility that people living within a community have for each other. As such, I'd even dare to say that the bystander effect is less likely to take place here compared to Canada. Within a short period of time, this new place proved to be very different from the home I had just left behind. A place where when you ask any visitor what they enjoyed the most about it, the answer is usually the people first, often described as warm and friendly. Before, I thought it was just the warmth of the Zambian sun that I had left behind. But I quickly realized that its people are also a source of that warmth and sunniness. Canada is a highly developed country, according to all the possible metrics you could think of, especially now as I pursue a degree in development studies. Developed countries are defined by their established infrastructure, their use of advanced technology, and their functional economic systems. All of the things that impressed me as a newcomer. Though I must say, what impressed me the most was the roads without potholes. The modernization theory of development, which isn't so popular and has several critiques, suggests that developing countries like Zambia need to break free from the shackles of tradition, seeing it as the greatest obstacle to their development. But it is this very tradition that we're encouraged to abandon that has inculcated a strong sense of belonging in most of us. Zambian culture, regardless of its many ethnic groups, 72 and counting, is deeply rooted in a sense of community and the interconnectedness of its people. Would this be a fair price to pay to achieve Zambia's development? It surely can't be, and it isn't the only way. Unlike the modern individualistic society I had moved to, Zambians tend to possess a communal spirit that easily makes those we often interact with quickly feel like family. There are several Zambian proverbs about life, about wisdom, about cooperation. And one thing I seem to notice is that most of them seem to offer advice on how to live with or among people. One of the most common Zambian Bemba proverbs says, Mayo mpapa naine nkakupapa, which translates to, Mother, carry me on your back, and later, I will carry you. This proverb doesn't only speak to the relationship between a parent and a child. It can also speak to the general reciprocity that exists in any relationship that one may have with others. As Zambian society becomes increasingly modern, emulating the ways of the West in our pursuit of development, is this happening with these traditional values at its core? Or shall it be at the expense of our sense of community that values living in harmony with others? I'd like to take us back to Canada and my continued attempt to assimilate into this new society. There's a quote from Nikesh Shukla's book, The Good Immigrant, that says, "The question, where are you from, has been both innocuous and frightening." Where are you from usually means, how did you get here? Or even clearer, you don't belong here. I did get asked this question a lot, and I wonder if it's a question that Africans or any other ethnicities living in diaspora must simply grow to live with. The people asking the question didn't necessarily mean ill, but I think there was a difference with how the question was asked there and how Zambians interact with guests or people they presume to not be from here. Here, the question is presented as one of curiosity, only after someone has been welcomed. Where someone is from doesn't matter. The most important thing is making them feel welcome and accepted. And I love that about us. I did encounter microaggressions often, and that may have played a factor in my decision to return home. Some people said my name was too long or too hard to pronounce, and they asked if I had a nickname to make it easier for them. Zambians have their own reverse version of this, where they insist on giving newcomers a Zambian name. Not necessarily to replace their actual name, but just to make them feel even more welcome. An example of this is the former British High Commissioner to Zambia, Nicholas Woolley, who was fondly known by Nkole to some. The biggest challenge I experienced living so far away from home was all of the family and cultural events I got to miss out on. The weddings, births, and even deaths. The COVID-19 pandemic was a particularly difficult time, and many people lost their loved ones, which got me thinking. As most companies had implemented a fully remote working policy, I took the opportunity to visit home for an extended period of time. I came back home, and I was able to reconnect with more family and friends than I would have been able to. Even the simple interactions with strangers, as I ran day-to-day errands, exuded so much warmth that I had grown cold to. I began to realize how disconnected I had been feeling. And this reconnection gave me the courage to introspect and consider uprooting a life I had gotten used to. I made the decision then and there to move back home to the land of my people. I got back to Canada, and the 5 months I had given myself to settle my affairs felt like they couldn't go by quickly enough. I eagerly counted down the days, and finally, the day came. That eagerness I once had to leave Zambia to go to Canada had now been reversed, and I was now eager, if not more, to return back to Zambia. I got back home, and I now had the luxury of time to take in the country through a new set of eyes, to ascertain what had changed and what had stayed almost exactly the same. The fact of the matter is that the place I had returned to is not the place I had left. I had to, and still to this day, I'm in the process of reconciling these changes, relearning the country, and in some ways, relearning myself. I now have a deep-found appreciation and sense of curiosity about Zambian traditions and practices that play an integral role in forging and enforcing community ties. I realize that they weren't primitive, as I'd mistakenly previously thought. There was actually much thought and planning that went into them, and perhaps they simply weren't explained well enough. The true essence of these practices is getting more diluted by the day, as more of my peers and younger feel that they are not of much use in this modern age. As Zambian society progresses, aspiring to emulate countries like Canada and the USA as our hashtag goals, let us not lose sight of who we are at our core. All that glitters is not necessarily gold. And maybe, just maybe, that gold was in us all along. Let us consciously endeavor to preserve the traditions, the proverbs, and practices that kept our communities united and supportive. For so long, they held our communities together. And look at how that peace and warmth still permeates to this day. The Republic of Zambia turned 60 this year, and it offered a moment of reflection to look back at how far or not we've come from independence. I invite us to envision Zambia at 100, when one day we too have established infrastructure, advanced technology, functional economic systems. I'd like to hope that we'll still be known for our friendliness and warmth.